Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in Geography. Today, we're going to wrap up this discussion on China and its neighbors by finally getting to China's neighbors. Now, we've certainly talked about quite a few of China's neighbors, so we are going to focus today on this very brief video on Taiwan and Mongolia. So, what we're going to be able to do today, we're going to be able to identify the cultural elements of Taiwan, specifically economy and people, and with Mongolia we'll do much the same, although we'll talk a little bit about their history as well. Certainly a very brief video today, but let's go ahead and get started. So let's start with Taiwan. So just to get our bearings here, we're about 100 miles off the coast of mainland China, and certainly we've talked about the two existing Chinas that existed in 1949, including the Republic of China, which again we will call Taiwan today. And so economically, you're going to see a lot of high technology. You're going to see a lot of different corporations being found here, and trade, of course, between the port cities like you'll find throughout Taiwan, but also certainly just a lot of trade going through Taiwan throughout the world. Agriculture is still going to be present here. You're still going to see a lot of the main staples that you'd see in mainland China too, certainly along those terrace fields in the hillsides. For the most part, agriculturally, they're pretty self-sufficient, and they actually do export some food too. So they're able to feed that population, which is about 23 million, while still having some extra to sell on the open market. And so when we look at the people, again, 23 million people call Taiwan home. And certainly throughout its history, it's been a part of China. It's also been part of the Empire of Japan, and then went back to being a part of China towards sort of independence. Again, some nations recognize Taiwanese independence, others do not. We've talked a little bit about the role that the United States plays in this, and certainly wanting to not become too involved. Again, gotta walk that tightrope due to the importance of the economic trade between China and the United States. And so officially, no, they do not recognize Taiwanese independence. As far as the people go, about 75% are urban, so we got a fairly large urban population here. Taipei is your largest city. It's also your capital of Taiwan. And so certainly looking at an island nation that certainly has many connections to China. It certainly has a very connected history to China, but also one that certainly has developed its own economy, while still, of course, being very connected to China. And then we're going to wrap up today with a really brief introduction to Mongolia. So if you're trying to kind of get your bearings, again, we're certainly off like north central China. And we're talking about with Mongolia about a nation that's about the size of Alaska. So it's a fairly large population. It's one of the least dense populations in the world. On average, like for every square kilometer, you're going to have about 2 people. And so certainly an area that is not densely populated. Economically, mining is going to be a big part of this. They're going to rely on those mountain ranges. Copper and gold are going to be a couple of the big elements, certainly natural resources that are coming out of those mountains. And then, of course, livestock. And for my students, we'll dive a little bit more into this nomadic culture that's pictured certainly here in the lower left, and certainly how eagles and riding horses and living in yurts and other elements of their culture have been passed down for thousands of years. And so when you look at the people of Mongolia, certainly you're going to see about half the population lives in the capital. But again, you're also going to see people living in these very rural areas. And in fact, close to 20% of Mongolia is protected land. And so with the government maybe even looking to expand that in the near future. So certainly if you're looking for natural beauty and almost kind of unaffected wilderness, at least as unaffected maybe as you can be in the world, Mongolia maybe should be towards the top of your list of places to go. But certainly you've got a history of horse riding. This is still something that's a big part of the culture, whether it's the nomadic people or even tourists being involved in that. But certainly that came with, the light cavalry of the Mongol people. And again, you're going to see throughout Mongol history a lot of history of these warring tribes, and probably the most famous figure in Mongolian history is Genghis Khan, also sometimes called Genghis Khan. And certainly he's going to help, along with certainly his sons and then later his future descendants, are going to help create what we would probably call the largest contiguous empire, that is, connected empire in world history. Second overall. The British, of course, had a larger total area when it came to their empire, but created this extensive empire, and about 80% of what we would call Eurasia was controlled by the Mongols by the time we hit the year 1300 CE. Again, you've seen the traditional architecture of the yurt certainly present in especially nomadic culture, but you'll find them still throughout, outside of the cities, especially in Mongolia today. And the people ethnically tend to be pretty homogeneous. That being said, you'll certainly still find a variety of different ethnic groups, but they do predominantly are ethnically Mongol. And a large part of the population is Buddhist. And so that's going to wrap up this short video about China and its neighbors. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next edition of Mr. American's Moments in Geography.